This week, we delve into Australia's most notorious encounter with what is known as the Shadow People, an encounter that would become a pivotal catalyst in propelling knowledge of life beyond Earth into the public mainstream. Join us as we take a late-night cruise with Kelly Cahill and her husband into the cold, lonely depths of missing time through the foothills of the southern Dandenong Mountains. It was like waking from some vague daydream. As she returned to her senses, focusing on the dark silhouettes of the trees as they rushed past outside the window, Kelly Cahill turned to her husband with an odd look of confusion upon her face. Andrew seemed focused upon the road ahead, before he finally turned to her with an equally haunted expression. Meekly, she asked him if she had fallen asleep, but he couldn't answer. He simply affected a tighter grip on the steering wheel and shook his head with uncertainty. It was obvious to both of them that they were experiencing the same sense of inner turmoil, though they could not understand what that turmoil was or why they felt it. Something had just happened, but for some reason, they had no recollection of it. There was an odd odour inside the vehicle, and she could feel a small irritation, like a minor burning sensation somewhere on her midriff. But it was this vague memory of the red lights that bothered her. She didn't know what the lights were or where she had seen them, just that there had been many, all gliding towards her. The car hit a pothole in the road, snatching her from her reverie. Stunned and disorientated, the couple continued their journey in silence, exhausted and longing for their beds, wanting only to alleviate whatever mysterious deeds had unsettled them. On the 8th of August 1993, Kelly and Andrew Cahill were driving home after attending a barbecue hosted by one of their friends. Although it was winter in Australia, it had not been particularly cold. The evening had brought with it a cool breeze and some pockets of light rain, but it had not been enough to dampen their spirits. They had sat chatting with their friends for many hours before finally heading home at around midnight. Their journey took them along Belgrave-Hallam Road. Stretching over the long Dandenong Mountains of southern Australia, the pair made their way through the rolling countryside with ease, looking forward to retiring to their beds due to the lateness of the hour. However, at some point along their route, they spotted what Kelly described as a blimp rising out of the distance. Slowing down, they kept their eyes on this strange object as it drew closer and realized it was actually disc-shaped. Hovering at double the height of the treetops, it drew fast upon them, emitting a dazzling orange glow. The couple could not take their eyes off it as they peered at dark figures standing tall behind what appeared to be windows around the object's outer rim. Kelly had just enough time to point and tell Andrew to look at the people in the windows before it suddenly disappeared. Under the waning moon, the couple continued for another mile or so before noticing a blinding light in the middle distance. The closer they moved towards it, the more they realized it appeared to be a screen of pure white light draped across the landscape ahead of them. Kelly raised her hand to shield her eyes as they drove into it, unable to see anything beyond its radiance. The next thing she knew, the light had disappeared, but their car seemed to be much further along the road, and Kelly immediately wondered if she had blacked out. When the couple returned home, Kelly noticed a mysterious geometric marking below her navel, a red equilateral triangle, the sides of which were about 10 millimeters in length. Several layers of skin within this marking appeared to have been burned away. The couple also discovered that they returned home an hour and a half later than they should have done, meaning that there were 90 minutes of their journey they could not account for. Exhausted, they didn't think too much of it, but the next morning, Kelly in particular began to feel that something was off. Over the next few days, she commenced a long and heavy menstruation, even though her next cycle was not due for a while. This was accompanied by daily nauseating migraines, which she experienced on and off for about 6 weeks. Medical treatment was sought, and doctors were able to detect an infection in her womb. Further tests were carried out, including sonograms, but nothing would yield an answer as to its cause. She was then hospitalized, and only after being placed on a strong course of antibiotics did her symptoms begin to abate. As for her migraines, the doctors performed CAT scans looking for any signs of trauma, but again, nothing was detected. She was simply given painkillers and discharged. But in reality, the real horror of what took place was only just beginning. Soon, a whole sequence of harrowing events would begin to unfold from her memory, events so extraordinary that her accounts would leave UFO investigators and medical professionals arrested by their utter perplexity and marvel. What she would discover would forever leave an impression, not just upon her life, but also upon her skin and in the soil and grass where those memories were forged. On the night in question, after driving through the mysterious curtain of light, Kelly eventually recalled that they pulled off the road and parked next to a large open field. But what awaited them in that field, they could never have imagined. A colossal craft the size of a 3-story building and as wide as an Olympic swimming pool hovered in the air a short distance away. The two of them stepped out of their vehicle, and it quickly became apparent that Kelly and Andrew were not the only ones who had stopped to observe the strange object. 2 other cars had pulled up about 100 or so meters away, a man and 2 women in the closest of these vehicles, and another man travelling alone in the one furthest away. Exhilarated by this rare opportunity to witness something so extraordinary, Kelly and the others looked on in amazement. But then, a tall dark figure appeared beneath the craft, with a large group of other dark figures standing behind it. Slowly, Kelly's enthusiasm soured into a brooding uncertainty which pooled in the pit of her stomach. She stated that this sensation was like low-frequency waves, so dense and profound that it became an arresting physical weight upon her. Spellbound, she lost control of her senses and suddenly went mad with absolute terror. She desperately tried to free herself from what she described as an almost hypnotic trance, but no matter how much she fought to secure her own sanity, there was nothing she could do. The figures, who possessed bright red eyes which were disproportionately large in relation to their heads, then split up and headed towards each separate gathering of people, affecting the appearance of demons gliding across the field towards them. One group charged after Cahill and her husband, another sped after the party further down the road. An electric blow then struck Kelly at her solar plexus, knocking the wind out of her lungs and sending her flying onto her back. Struggling for breath, she attempted again and again to sit up, convinced she was about to die. Suddenly, Kelly was unable to see. There was nothing but darkness as she was overcome by an intense nausea. She sat up, screaming for Andrew, and a hand was then placed upon her shoulder. She recalls one of the figures speaking in plain English.
Do something about it.
Nearby, she could hear Andrew demanding to be released.
Let us go, you bastards.
We mean you no harm.
If you didn't mean us any harm, then why did you hit my wife?
Completely terrified, she vomited. She then felt someone examining her. The next moment, she and her husband were back in their car, driving on Belgrave Hallam Road in silence. Kelly would later seek the assistance of UFO researchers who would conduct the most thorough UFO investigation in Australia's history at that time. Cahill's case would be pivotal in bringing this subject into the public eye. For 18 months solid, the location of the incident was intensely probed. Researchers divided several acres of the field into 1-meter blocks with pegs and tape. Samples were taken from the ground, aerial surveys were carried out using infrared photography, and magnetic readings were logged by a portable magnetometer. What was found would only prompt more questions regarding the significance of the markings discovered on some of the victims. The ground scans uncovered a large, 20-meter triangular shape in the field. Initially, it was thought to be an impression, but this turned out not to be the case. A carcinogen known as pyrene was instead discovered, which is a chemical found in coal mines, even though no coal mines were located anywhere near the field. Whatever the triangle signified, for 5 months following the event, Kelly would be visited 4 more times by one of the frightening beings she had witnessed, who would stand at her bedside in a cloak and hood. She described these visitations in a strange way. The experience would start as a dream, in which she wasn't able to see the entity, but could feel it in other ways. She felt as if she was being pulled by a nearby presence, which spoke to her and told her not to panic. But despite its assurances, she felt the same profound horror she had experienced on the field. It was only when she awoke that she would see the entity briefly standing over her before it disappeared right before her eyes. Aside from these odd visitations, she and Andrew would have countless bizarre electrical disturbances in their home. Kelly related how appliances and lights would turn on by themselves, and that she would receive static shocks through things which were not otherwise conductive, such as soil, wood, and rocks. The most incredible of these anomalies occurred when the engine of her car started of its own accord, despite the vehicle having still been locked and the kill switch activated. Psychologically, the whole incident had a tremendous effect on Cahill's husband. For many years he would not divulge his recollection of it, until reluctantly, he admitted to Kelly that not only did he remember his experience, but also that he'd had several UFO encounters prior to it. Unbeknown to the Cahills, the other people who had stopped to observe the strange object that night had also reported their experiences to researchers. Kelly Cahill had never met any of the occupants of the other vehicles, either before or after the event, and yet the similarity between each of the accounts is astonishing. On the night in question, the vehicle closest to them, parked about 100 meters away, was driven by a man named Bill. He was accompanied by his wife, Glenda, and a family friend named Jane. Another car was parked a further 30 meters beyond theirs, and this was occupied by a government law department employee named Dave. All of them, apart from Andrew, would produce illustrations of what they had seen. Neither group was made aware of each other's drawings until much later, and the uncanny resemblance between them would only further reinforce the reality and nature of the event. All depicted a circular craft lined with many windows and unnaturally dark figures standing between 6 and 7 feet tall, backlit by a bright white beam being emitted from above. Of the 6 witnesses, Kelly, Glenda, Jane and Dave each discovered a triangular burn mark on their body, located just below the navel. Andrew and Bill, however, had no such wound. The 2 other women had also suffered gynecological problems similar to Kelly's in the immediate aftermath, and Glenda in particular would recall waking up in a strange room, strapped to a table, and being examined by a tall entity dressed in a dark cloak. This sounds eerily similar to the creature described in Kelly's subsequent visitation experiences. The only difference in the accounts is that Bill, Glenda, Jane and Dave all reported hearing a humming sound from the craft and blacked out immediately after crossing the road to see what was in the field. Although they saw the figures, they don't recall them having bright red eyes as Kelly described. On the other hand, the Cahills didn't hear any humming and seemed to have remained conscious for a while longer than the other 4 witnesses. Kelly would go on to say that the eyes of the figures glowed red only after they began to glide towards them. Finally, the accounts of all 6 witnesses were backed up by reports from residents in the area, saying that they had seen a strange object in the skies at around the same time that the event occurred. We have covered several abduction experiences in previous episodes, and whilst those accounts are both harrowing and intriguing in their own ways, in nearly every single case, there is almost always only one witness. The fact that in this instance, there are multiple witnesses who are previously unfamiliar with each other all reporting the same thing lends a high degree of credence to their stories. And the fact that the studies of the ground on which the event took place yielded strange results, somewhat corroborating their accounts, should leave even the most ardent of skeptics wondering, what if? What was it that the Cahills and the others present experienced? Was it really an alien abduction, or could it have been a shared hallucination between all 6 witnesses? If so, what would have caused it? And why did residents across the region also report seeing a vivid orange light in the sky? Perhaps it was more spiritual in nature. Could they all have been spirited away, or even undergone a collective near-death experience? Kelly and Andrew certainly seem to lean towards this possibility, at least at first. Having both come from deeply religious upbringings, their initial impressions of the beings who seized upon them were that they were entirely demonic in nature. For many people, the triangular abrasions discovered on their bodies go some way to supporting this assertion. As with the Buffalo Ranch in Colorado, where many otherworldly occurrences took place, some commentators believe that the painting of an equilateral triangle upon the carcasses of the mutilated cows was a way of mocking the Holy Trinity. It's also interesting that all 6 witnesses described the entities as featureless black shadows, much like the shadow people seen in many haunting experiences. Red-eyed shadow people, as they were described by Kelly herself, have been witnessed all over the world and are viewed by many cultures as demonic, carrying with them sinister agendas. Regardless of what the circumstances may be surrounding the events that took place in the Dandenong Mountains, it was certainly enough to have caused great distress in 6 different people all at once, to the point where it changed their lives forever. They would never be the same again. We only hope that Kelly, Andrew, Bill, Glenda, Jane and David managed to come to terms with what happened and eventually found peace and solace in the face of such a terrifying experience. Until next time.
Jesus, Kelly. That fucking stinks.